They all smiled when she walked in with her daughter, until Grandma stood up, pointed and said, "That child is a stain on our bloodline. She doesn't belong here." Nicole froze. Her 6-year-old clutched her leg, confused and terrified. The room fell into a sickening silence. That's the moment Nicole knew. Silence was no longer protection. She had to fight, not just for her child's dignity, but for the truth. And what she uncovered at the family gathering would tear generations apart. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from cruel judgment, especially within your own family, this story will hit home. Tap the like button if you believe love should never come with conditions, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Nicole hadn't intended to fall in love with someone outside her faith, but love, as it often does, showed up in unexpected ways. She met Aaron in the most ordinary place, a downtown public library in Milwaukee, where she worked part-time while studying for her master's in education. He was researching post-war theology for a documentary project. Their first conversation had nothing to do with faith, but everything to do with kindness, curiosity, and an easy, instant connection. Aaron was Jewish. Nicole had been raised in a tight-knit, ultra-conservative Christian household. Her family belonged to a small denomination that emphasized purity, separation from the world, and strict spiritual hierarchy. Her parents had made it clear from childhood, marry within the church or marry disgrace. But Aaron made her feel seen in a way no one ever had. He listened. He asked questions. He challenged her gently to think for herself. And so, despite the quiet warnings echoing in the back of her mind, Nicole allowed herself to fall. By the time she told her family she was engaged, the reactions ranged from cold silence to outright fury. Her father said he wouldn't walk her down the aisle. Her mother wept for 3 days and wrote her a 12-page letter full of scripture and sorrow. But no reaction cut deeper than her future mother-in-law, Margaret, Aaron's mother. Margaret was, outwardly, a woman of grace. Tall, composed, always dressed in beige and pearls, with a soft, slow voice that masked sharp judgment. She never raised her tone, but somehow, she always got the final word. And when Nicole joined their family, Margaret welcomed her with rehearsed politeness and backhanded compliments. "She's curious," Margaret once said to a cousin over brunch, when Nicole had excused herself to the bathroom. "Not exactly what I imagined for Aaron, but I suppose love is blind, isn't it?" Nicole noticed, but didn't confront. She told herself it was generational, cultural, something that time would soften. She wanted to believe that motherhood would bridge the gap. But when little Miriam was born, things didn't get better. They got worse. Miriam was everything to Nicole. Big green eyes like her dad's, soft curls that bounced when she laughed, and a mind that soaked up books like a sponge. But Margaret, who had been cold before, now turned frigid. She rarely held the baby, never called her by name, and once, when Nicole asked if she'd like to babysit, Margaret replied flatly, "I don't connect with children born outside spiritual alignment." Nicole didn't say anything that day. She went home, rocked Miriam to sleep, and cried quietly into her daughter's blanket. Still, she stayed civil. For Aaron. For the idea of family. She endured years of Sunday dinners filled with cutting remarks disguised as concern. Whenever Miriam asked why Grandma never hugged her, Nicole would smile and say, "She's just old-fashioned, sweetie. It's not about you." But in her heart, Nicole knew better. And something inside her was growing, a quiet, slow fire she couldn't name yet. It wasn't just about Margaret. It was about a child growing up under someone's judgment. It was about a legacy of silence Nicole no longer wanted to pass down. The final straw came when Aaron's side of the family planned a reunion. A gathering of nearly 40 relatives, many of them deeply religious, others more relaxed, but still bound by the same unspoken codes. Nicole was hesitant, but Aaron encouraged her to come. "It's just a meal. We'll smile, we'll eat, and we'll leave," he said. Nicole bought Miriam a pale yellow dress with lace sleeves for the occasion. The little girl twirled in front of the mirror, excited to meet her cousins. Nicole packed snacks, toys, even coloring books, anything to make the afternoon smooth. She walked into that family hall trying to believe things could be different. But that was before Margaret stood up in front of everyone, before the word stain came out of her mouth. The community hall smelled like lemon polish and brisket. Folding chairs creaked as family members shuffled in, greeting each other with familiar smiles and half-hearted hugs. It was the first time in almost a decade that the entire Bernstein family had gathered under one roof. Grandparents, great-uncles, second cousins from out of state. Everyone was dressed in their modest best. Nicole had rehearsed the day in her mind, trying to hold on to the idea that if she just kept her head down, kept Miriam occupied, and smiled politely, they could all make it through unscathed. Aaron was already chatting with his cousin Saul near the coffee urn. Miriam clutched her mother's hand tightly, her wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar crowd. Then came the toast. It was supposed to be a simple welcome from Margaret, Aaron's mother, the matriarch of the gathering. She stood at the front of the room in her usual pale blue cardigan, her posture straight as ever. A hush fell over the room. "We are gathered here today," she began smoothly, "to celebrate our shared history, our blood, our traditions." People nodded. Someone clapped gently. Margaret's voice softened. "Family is sacred. It's not just about biology. It's about covenant. It's about spiritual continuity, and it's our duty to protect the integrity of that line." Nicole felt a chill crawl up her arms. Margaret went on, her tone growing oddly pointed. "Some may have strayed, some unions may not have followed the path we expected, and sometimes children are born into complications." There was a pause. Then, without looking directly at Nicole, Margaret raised her glass toward the far table where Nicole and Miriam sat. "But let us remember, not all children bear the mark of blessing. Some—" She paused again. This time she did look. Directly, coldly. "Are stains we must endure, not celebrate." The words didn't land right away. Nicole blinked, unsure if she'd heard what she thought she did. But then the room shifted. A murmur swept across the chairs like a ripple in still water. Someone coughed. Someone else awkwardly set down their fork. A third cousin looked away, pretending to check their phone. Nicole turned to Miriam. Her daughter had stopped coloring. She was staring straight ahead, her lips parted slightly. "Mama, what's a stain?" she whispered. Nicole felt her breath catch. She wanted to stand, to scream, to grab her daughter and leave. But something rooted her in place, something heavier than embarrassment. It was rage, ancient, cold, familiar. The kind of rage her mother had swallowed for years at church when the men spoke down to her. The kind of rage her grandmother had endured, raising 8 children while being told to submit. And now it lived in Nicole. She didn't leave. She didn't cry. She didn't throw a scene. Instead, she gently reached down, lifted Miriam into her lap, and kissed her forehead. "You're not a stain," she whispered. "You're a miracle." Then she looked straight at Margaret and smiled. A calm, terrifying smile. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but something had cracked beneath Nicole's skin. For years she had endured the small slights, the hidden barbs, the polite exclusion. But this wasn't covert anymore. This was public humiliation, and her daughter had witnessed it. That night, Nicole tucked Miriam into bed and watched her fall asleep, gripping her stuffed bunny tighter than usual. Her little chest rose and fell unevenly. Nicole walked back into the kitchen where Aaron was sitting at the table, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. "She said our daughter was a stain," Nicole said flatly. Aaron sighed. "She didn't say her name." She looked at her. "You heard it. Everyone heard it." He didn't respond. Nicole stared at him. "You've been quiet for too long. And so have I. Aaron looked up, his eyes softened. I'm sorry. I don't want sorry, Nicole said. I want you to back me when I do something about it. Aaron hesitated, then nodded. Whatever you need. That was the moment Nicole's grief turned to resolve. She wouldn't raise her daughter in silence. She wouldn't let Margaret's poison pass unchallenged. If the family worshipped tradition, she would show them what it looked like when tradition protected cruelty. She wasn't just going to stand up to Margaret, she was going to expose her, and she was going to do it in a language the family couldn't ignore, through truth, witnesses, and accountability. Nicole didn't sleep much the night after the reunion. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling fans spinning in soft circles, replaying Margaret's words again and again in her mind. Her daughter's question, "Mama, what's a stain?" echoed louder than anything else. She knew one thing. She wasn't going to let this rot fester in silence anymore. Nicole wasn't impulsive. She didn't believe in dramatic confrontations that led nowhere. She'd learned over the years, especially being in that family, that the only way to fight power was with structure. The next morning, after dropping Miriam off at school, Nicole sat in her car for 10 full minutes, just breathing. Then she pulled out a notepad and began to write everything she could remember. Every moment of Margaret's cruelty over the years. Every passive-aggressive comment. Every moment of exclusion. Every backhanded insult at family dinners. Every time Margaret used religion as a shield to wound. She filled 4 pages in an hour. Then she made a call. Dr. Elise Hammond wasn't just a respected child psychologist. She was also someone Nicole had met years ago during a seminar on childhood trauma and generational shame. Elise had spoken softly, but her words had stayed with Nicole. Silence is never neutral. It either protects the victim or the abuser. Nicole asked for an appointment, not for herself, but for Miriam. They began sessions under the guise of helping Miriam with confidence and emotional processing. But Elise was sharp. Within a few sessions, she identified subtle markers of social anxiety, self-worth damage, and internalized confusion about acceptance. "Your daughter's smart," Elise said after the 3rd session. "She knows when she's being treated differently. She may not have the vocabulary yet, but she carries it." Nicole's heart clenched. Elise continued, "If you're collecting evidence, I'd suggest we document this officially. I can provide statements, evaluations, anything that helps support the emotional impact." Nicole nodded. "I'm not suing anyone," she said. Elise gave her a small smile. "Sometimes the court isn't the goal. Sometimes, truth needs to stand on its own legs." Over the next month, Nicole became deliberate. She saved voicemails from Margaret where her tone was icy. She screen-captured texts that used religious rhetoric to isolate or guilt her. She asked Aaron, reluctantly at first, to record any future family interactions where Margaret crossed a line. She spoke with other in-laws who had felt similarly shamed or sidelined, gathering their experiences, not to accuse, but to build a pattern. And then she did something even braver. She began talking to members of the faith community itself. Nicole met with Pastor Fields, a progressive spiritual leader who had once been a guest speaker at her old congregation. She brought him the transcripts, the psychological notes, the family dynamics. "I'm not here to slander," she told him. "I'm here to ask, when tradition protects cruelty, who do we answer to?" Fields was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Nicole never forgot. "Truth, when brought into the light, doesn't destroy faith. It purifies it." He agreed to attend a future family gathering, if needed, not to judge, but to witness. Nicole knew the next reunion wouldn't be for a few more months. But she wasn't waiting in fear. She was preparing for a reckoning, one quiet, organized, deliberate step at a time. Margaret could feel it. Something was changing. Nicole no longer avoided her at family functions. She didn't shrink or smile politely when Margaret made cutting remarks. She didn't excuse herself to go help Miriam whenever conversations turned sharp. Instead, she watched, listened, responded with measured, unsettling calm. And that unnerved Margaret more than any argument could have. It started subtly. At a cousin's baby shower, when Margaret made one of her classic backhanded observations, "Well, of course Miriam's a bit sensitive. Mixed children often struggle with stability." Nicole didn't flinch. She simply turned, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "I've documented that comment. Would you like to rephrase it?" Margaret blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're being recorded, Margaret. Just so you're aware." The table fell silent. Someone dropped a fork. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing else for the rest of the afternoon. That was the beginning of her unraveling. Behind the scenes, Nicole's case was growing stronger. Dr. Hammond compiled a formal report on Miriam's emotional health, carefully worded, but precise in its implications. It highlighted the consistent psychological impact of familial rejection, especially from a primary elder figure. Nicole didn't post anything online. She didn't rant or expose anyone publicly, yet. But she did reach out to Aaron's older sister, Rachel, who had always kept her distance from Margaret. Over coffee one morning, Nicole shared everything. Rachel listened quietly, then leaned back and sighed. "I always thought she was cruel, but I told myself it was just how she was. Maybe I just didn't want to face it." Nicole looked at her. "Would you be willing to say that? To the family?" Rachel hesitated, then she nodded. "She's done real damage. It's time someone named it." Nicole had no intention of starting a war. What she wanted was a reckoning, a mirror held up to decades of behavior disguised as righteousness, a chance to free her daughter and herself from the unspoken rule that said, "Keep the peace, no matter how much it costs your soul." She began planning for the next family council gathering, a yearly event where important matters were discussed: estate planning, elder care, schooling decisions. Margaret always chaired it, wielding tradition like a throne. But this time, Nicole submitted a request. She wanted to speak. No one refused. No one expected what was coming either. 2 weeks before the meeting, Margaret called Aaron directly. "I'm concerned about your wife," she said. "She seems unstable. I've heard she's been digging up old conversations, stirring discontent." Aaron, for the first time in years, didn't try to defend or soften. "She's standing up for our daughter," he said. "And frankly, I'm proud of her." Margaret exhaled harshly. "She's trying to destroy this family's name." "No, Mom. She's trying to protect it. From you." The line went quiet. Then Margaret hung up. By the time the family council gathered in the upstairs meeting room of the Bernstein Foundation Center, Nicole was ready. She brought no drama, no anger, just a binder, and a folder of printed statements. She wore a soft gray blouse and black slacks. Miriam stayed home with a sitter. Aaron sat quietly beside her, his presence silent but strong. Margaret took her usual seat at the head of the table, composed, distant. But Nicole noticed the stiffness in her posture, the tightening at the corners of her mouth. When Nicole's turn came to speak, she didn't raise her voice. She began with her daughter. She told the room what it felt like to watch a child shrink in real time, confused by rejection she hadn't earned. She read excerpts from Dr. Hammond's evaluation. She handed out copies of texts and quotes Margaret had sent over the years. She played from a small speaker the recording of the stain comment. The room sat in frozen silence. Nicole ended with one sentence. "I'm not here to divide this family. I'm here to stop the rot before it passes to the next generation." She sat down, and for the first time in years, Margaret had no words. If you've ever watched someone finally stand up to years of quiet cruelty, you know how powerful that moment can be. Hit the like button if Nicole's strength moved you, and drop a comment if you believe every child deserves to be defended, no matter what. Nicole knew that truth, by itself, didn't always change minds, but truth with witnesses, that was something else entirely. In the 2 weeks following the family council meeting, word had quietly spread through the extended Bernstein clan. Not everyone agreed with what Nicole had done, but many listened, and more than a few sent her messages afterward. I always thought something felt wrong, but I never had the words. You were braver than I ever was. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. It was subtle, but Nicole could feel it. The current was shifting. Margaret, once unquestioned in her authority, was now a figure others approached more cautiously. Her silence was no longer mistaken for wisdom. It was starting to look like something else: fear. Nicole wasn't done yet. The annual family retreat was approaching, a long weekend hosted at the Bernstein family estate in Door County. It was a tradition stretching back 3 generations, complete with shared meals, prayer services, and discussions led by respected religious elders. And this year, Nicole was going to bring light into the darkest corners of that tradition. She made quiet arrangements. She invited Dr. Elise Hammond, not just to observe, but to offer a brief presentation on intergenerational faith-based trauma, framed as a helpful conversation for families. Elise agreed, on one condition: if things turn ugly, I walk. Nicole respected that. You'll be safe, she said. She also reached out to Pastor Fields, who had once told her, truth purifies faith. She invited him not as a challenger, but as a bridge, someone respected within both progressive and traditional circles. Fields agreed, but asked candidly, are you looking to change hearts, or just expose them? Nicole thought about that. I'm looking to protect my child, she said. If hearts change along the way, that's a bonus. The night before the retreat, Nicole packed Miriam's bag slowly. Her daughter now understood a little more about what was happening, enough to know that Grandma had said something hurtful and that Mommy was doing something about it. Are people going to be mad at us? Miriam asked, carefully folding her pajamas. Some might, Nicole said. But we're not doing anything wrong. We're just telling the truth. Miriam paused. Even if it makes people uncomfortable? Nicole knelt down. Especially then. They drove out the next morning, Erin at the wheel, quiet but firm beside her, and Nicole staring out the window at the winding pines, feeling both steel and dread in her chest. She wasn't walking into a fight. She was walking into a reckoning. It was a Friday morning when Grace entered the Hartwell law offices, but the energy in the air felt nothing like a normal day. She wore a tailored black dress, not mourning, not celebratory, just sharp, intentional, focused. Her expression didn't give anything away, yet her presence commanded attention. A quiet storm was about to break. She had made sure everyone who mattered would be present. Executives from the parent firm in New York were there for their scheduled quarterly compliance audit. A surprise to Linda, but not to Grace. She had arranged it with a few well-timed phone calls and a carefully worded email tipping off potential liabilities regarding workplace discrimination. Linda strutted through the glass hallway with her signature false confidence, heels clicking like gunshots. She didn't suspect a thing until she walked into the boardroom. The room was full. Senior partners, HR executives, legal counsel, and Grace, sitting calmly at the far end, a thick folder in front of her, flanked by the 2 attorneys she'd quietly retained. Linda froze. What is this? She demanded. Grace didn't flinch. A reckoning. Before Linda could respond, one of the auditors stood. We've received documentation regarding multiple instances of ADA violations and hostile work environment claims from this office. What documentation? Linda barked, trying to regain control. That's nonsense. Grace slid the folder forward. Every meeting you recorded without consent, every email you forwarded mocking my son, every expense you falsified and pinned on junior staff, I've cataloged it all. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. The weight of the evidence did the talking. Linda scoffed. You really think they'll take your word over mine? But then came the second folder. This one contained testimonies, anonymously at first, then signed, by other employees. People who had long suffered under Linda's manipulations and fear tactics. Grace had earned their trust over weeks of private conversations and shared stories. They had nothing to gain, only freedom to reclaim. "I didn't come here to destroy you, Linda," Grace said quietly. "You did that all on your own. I just made sure everyone saw it." The lead HR officer turned to Linda. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. We advise you to retain legal counsel." Linda's face collapsed into a contortion of disbelief and panic. Her voice trembled. You planned this?" Grace met her eyes, calm, cold. "No, you wrote this story. I just gave it a proper ending." Security was called. Linda's badge was deactivated before she left the building. The queen of the office, dethroned not by rage, but by precision. As she was escorted out, Linda turned one last time. "You'll regret this, Grace." But Grace just gave the faintest, most dignified smile. "I already did. Now, I'm done." In that moment, the entire floor seemed to exhale. People peeked from their offices, stunned. Some whispered, some smiled. And one young assistant gave Grace a discreet nod of gratitude. The truth had been set free. The mask had fallen. The empire of fear crumbled in silence. Grace didn't need to raise her voice. She never had to throw a fit. Her revenge had always been in the making, not in fire, but in ice. Not in chaos, but in clarity. And now, finally, it was done. The silence that followed the confrontation was deafening. After Evelyn's truth shattered through the carefully polished lies of her sister and father, the family name, the one she once revered, stood in ruins. But strangely, Evelyn didn't feel broken. She felt something she hadn't known in years: free. The next morning, the crisp fall air wrapped around her as she walked through the gates of the law firm, not as the silent partner in the shadows, but as its rightful leader. Following her father's public disgrace, the board of directors convened for an emergency session. And when Evelyn walked in with the folder labeled "Fraudulent Holdings, Benjamin Ross," no one dared question her authority. He was forced to resign that afternoon. As for Madeline, she tried to act unfazed. But without their father's protection, her influence disintegrated almost overnight. Staff she once belittled now met her with stone-cold glares. Clients pulled out of her personal portfolio. Her desk was cleared within days, her final tantrum echoing down the glass halls as security escorted her from the building. But Evelyn didn't gloat. She focused on rebuilding. Her first act was to revise the firm's ethics charter, ensuring every employee, regardless of background, had the tools to report wrongdoing without fear. She started holding open forums, inviting even the youngest interns to speak their minds. A culture of fear was replaced with something better, one of respect, transparency, and accountability. She also restructured the charity fund, the one Madeline had funneled for her lifestyle expenses. Under Evelyn, it went toward legal aid for single mothers and immigrant families. Every month, she received letters from people she would never meet, thanking her for defending those who couldn't afford a voice. One evening, as Evelyn sat in her office, the skyline shimmering behind her, she picked up a photo of her mother, the one she had kept hidden in her drawer for years. For the first time, she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, "We're safe now, Mom. I did it." But healing didn't come all at once. Her father's betrayal still lingered like smoke. He had sold her trust, her inheritance, and her childhood, all for appearances. After his resignation, Benjamin tried reaching out, not with apologies, but excuses, justifications, pleas for understanding. Evelyn refused to meet him. Instead, she sent a simple letter. "Dad, you always wanted to protect the family name. You failed. I'm not here to rebuild what you broke. I'm here to redefine it. For good. Goodbye. She mailed it without return address. The old Evelyn would have wept, torn between duty and dignity, but not anymore. She had earned the right to walk away, not with revenge in her heart, but with peace in her hands. One rainy Sunday, she visited her mother's grave, now with fresh lilies and a restored headstone. This time, she didn't hide from the past. She embraced it. The storm had passed, and Evelyn Ross, once the quiet daughter in the shadows, now stood tall, not as a reflection of her father, but as her own name. The quiet after the storm felt almost unreal. For weeks, Maggie had operated like a machine, every moment driven by purpose, revenge, and the desperate need to protect her children. But now, standing in the silence of her home, she finally allowed herself to exhale. The kids were safe, physically, emotionally, and legally. Tyler had enrolled in a youth mentoring program where he met other boys who had faced tough family situations. He was slowly regaining his confidence. Some nights he would still jolt awake from nightmares, but now he came to Maggie's room, not with shame, but with trust. That alone meant everything. Lily had begun drawing again. Her latest sketch, a family of 3 holding hands beneath a stormy sky that was slowly clearing, hung proudly on the fridge. When Maggie had asked about it, Lily just smiled and said, "It's us. We're walking out of the rain." Maggie herself, though, healing was a trickier road. She couldn't deny that the revenge had left a part of her hollow. The triumph was real, but so was the cost. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she caught herself wondering if she'd gone too far. If the girl she used to be, the optimistic young woman who once believed in mercy, would even recognize the woman she had become. But then she'd remember the bruises, the threats, the way the system had looked the other way. And she'd remind herself, she didn't start this war, but she sure as hell ended it. One afternoon, she visited her father's grave. He hadn't been a good man. His silence and passive acceptance of Deborah's abuse had made him complicit. But he was still her father, and grief, like healing, was complicated. She knelt by the grave and whispered, "You could have stopped her, but you didn't. I did. That's the legacy I'm leaving my kids." After that, she didn't go back to the corporate world. She didn't want to live in boardrooms where silence was rewarded and harm was ignored. Instead, she became a counselor for a nonprofit, helping women escape abusive family structures, especially when the abuse came not from husbands, but mothers, sisters, aunts. The quiet corners society often ignored. Word spread. And one day, a woman showed up with her teen daughter. The girl had bruises she tried to hide beneath sleeves, a terrified look in her eyes that Maggie recognized all too well. The mother was in denial, blaming her own mother for discipline gone too far. Maggie sat them down, spoke gently but firmly. She didn't need to tell them her story. Her eyes said enough. In that moment, she knew something. Revenge had broken the cycle, but compassion would rebuild what was left behind. Years later, Tyler graduated college with honors in psychology. Lily published a graphic novel about a girl who tames monsters with her drawings. And Maggie, gray now at the temples but sharp-eyed as ever, stood in the crowd, clapping quietly, tears in her eyes. Her children were free, not just from harm, but from silence, from fear. And as she watched them step into a future she never thought possible, she whispered to herself, "I didn't just survive. I changed the story." And that, more than anything else, was the real victory.